Shobhaa, welcome to the fourth edition of the Bhopal Literature and Art Festival, to the salubrious lake city of Bhopal. And let me just mention how eagerly you were awaited by the colleges, the universities. I was besieged by calls asking me specially if I could arrange for you to be ferreted away to their college to address their students. And I slyly resisted that, but doesn't matter. As they say, the best laid plans of mice and men can go awry, and it's just a disappointment, just sad that we haven't been able to get you in person, but thanks to technology, we are almost there. Welcome.
Thank you, Bhopal. Thank you, all of you, and my apologies for not being there in person. But as I've explained, on compassionate grounds, I had an emergency in Pune that required me to be here. But I'm so happy to be talking to you, and I promise all the students in Bhopal, I'll make it up to you. I will be there in person. You just have to invite me and I'll be there. And this Zoom conversation is possible thanks to my wonderful neighbors, Manju, and her daughters and her husband, who've been very kind to manage all of this, because I'm just a total dud at technology.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, as you're aware, Shobhaa Day is a celebrity columnist, a novelist, a commentator. She started out at rather early age of 17 in those days as a career model, as a journalist, as a writing agony aunt for various people in magazines and journals. And at the young age of 23, she founded the now famous magazine Stardust. Then she started Society, and I think she was associated also with Celebrity. She has written overall 22 novels with names as fancy as Shri Lalji and Starry Nights, Socialite Evenings, and such like. She's famously also, Shobhaa, pardon me, you've been also famously referred to as the Daniel Steele of India. But we are delighted to have you because you're a great writer, and I think we all have enjoyed your writing, but that doesn't mean that we are not going to dissect your writing.
Oh, please do. I welcome that. Anything but a reference to either Daniel Steele or Jackie Collins. I'm happy with any and every other kind of dissection, but I don't see why we should constantly be compared to Western authors. I'd have been far more flattered had you brought in any Indian author's name.
Chetan
or
Bhagat.
Maybe at some distant time in the future, there will be a Shobhaa Day of Los Angeles or something like that, which will be wonderful because our reference points need to be asked. Our reference point should be us and our own writing community, and we shouldn't be always pitching ourselves as the something of India, when it's about time that there were people out there who said, we are so-and-so of America, and we wish we were as wonderful as the Indians are, which we indeed are.
One or two more. Thank you. You know, Shobhaa, you've dealt with issues such as, and these are very varied issues, such as the confines of a traditional conservative marriage, bored, rich housewives trapped in loveless marriages, extramarital affairs, false and fake spiritual leaders, moral decadence of the high fashion elite, exceptional materialism of the glitzy fancy rich, pimps, Western material culture, and you are one of those novelists who has kind of distinguished between Westernization and modernization, Westernism and modernism, and yet there is a paradox that you are viewed, and I'm quoting from the Wikipedia introduction to you, best known for her social depiction of socialites and sex in her works of fiction. How do you reconcile this paradox? How has that come about? We're all interested in knowing that.
How would you like to reconcile the fact that I have never, ever, ever looked at Wikipedia, my own entry, or bothered to edit, change, or alter it? Because honestly, my writing speaks for itself, and I'm not someone who is driven by what Wikipedia has to say about me. A lot of it is completely inaccurate, but that doesn't in any way impact the way I feel, think, write, and communicate. So my readers can determine for themselves what they wish to, because at the end of it all, every writer is writing for that reader, that one reader who will get it. Every writer has his or her truth to talk about. And it's really quite, you talk about irony and paradox. Well, yes, 40 years, 50 years of writing later, people are still obsessed with what they call the sex in my early novels. Well, get over it. We're in the 21st century. And sex is as valid a part of our lives, one of the most important part of human existence, according to me, and should not be swept under the carpet. Neither should we feel apologetic about it, nor should we pretend that women in particular are sexless beings. We are not earthworms. We are women. We have the same passion. We have the same romantic feelings. We have the same sexual desires as men. Is that so hard to stomach? And is sex such a terrifying three-letter word that we can't deal with it if a woman is tackling it? And I've done that with complete and total transparency and courage more than 40 years ago. And if I so choose to, I will take it up to the next level and make it still more in your face. But that is my choice as a writer, and it's your choice as a reader to accept it, reject it, or be indifferent to it.
Absolutely, and I think you've put it across very succinctly. You have accepted, and you do appear to be enjoying this image. And I'm quoting from another somebody who says, she throws in sex even when it doesn't fit in without sound reason. Do you think this reader is correct?
I think the reader needs therapy and is sex obsessed. And sir, I just need to tell you that, it's every writer's complete and total right to focus on whatever they wish to focus in their work. And most of the time, the people who are looking so desperately for anything sexual and titillating in my work, and if it's not there, which it hasn't been in out of those 22 books, maybe 5 books have anything that can be called explicit, and I'm very proud of those books. But the other books, there are readers like this person you're quoting who ask me, Madam, but why not more sex? Like there is a quota for sex, like a writer or an author comes to a book and says, too much or too little. Who determines that? Only the writer determines it. So I'm sorry, but this entire line of questioning, which is so focused primarily on sex, as if I've written nothing else. Maybe you guys might read my column this morning in the Times of India, which has got a huge amount of response. Women and sexuality is something that society in India, hypocritical society in India, finds so threatening. And I wonder what's wrong with the people who react the way they react. Why don't they ever question male writers, men who've been writing about this and more for centuries? The Kama Sutra is written by a man, our temple sculptures, I mean, you name it. Sexuality, sensuality, and India is something that has been celebrated. And why are we suddenly following a Victorian moral code, especially when it comes to a woman expressing herself? So much judgment, so much kind of horror, and so much almost a prurient interest in her personal life. A man is never asked that, oh, is this all about your life? Have you really experienced all these things that you write about? But invariably, any woman in India or internationally who has touched upon the subject is in the questions are voyeuristic. It's almost as if people are salivating at the thought, oh, is it possible that, this is all Shobhaa De's own life? Whether it is or it isn't, I'm not about to say whether it is or it isn't. You can keep fantasizing. I've done what I wish to do. I've written the books I wish to write, and I have full and complete ownership over my work. Take it or leave it.
Absolutely. Shobhaa, we are very happy to have as a co-discussant with you, and since you talked of women, Dr. Neelkamal Kapoor, who is currently professor and head of the Department of Pathology and Lab Medicine. So she's heavily into diagnostics, and so she's going to diagnose your work a little more clinically, a little better perhaps than I could. An eminent pathologist with almost 40 years of work experience and somebody who's received numerous national and international awards. She's a prolific writer. She writes both in Hindi and English. She has written and published books both in English and in Hindi on pathology, parenting, a story collection, and columns for major newspapers on healthcare issues. So Neelkamal is going to ask you a couple of questions now. Neelkamal ji.
Hi, Shobhaa.
Hey, hi.
Since we were talking of your almost 40 years or 60 years of career and almost 45 years as an author,
Yes.
and you were saying that the connect is between the writer and the reader. But
Yes.
honestly, you must be dealing with, if not 4, then at least 3 generations of readers. So what
Yes.
kind of changes you found, in your relationship and how it affected your writing? That would be very interesting to know for all of us.
What a wonderful and intelligent and insightful question. Thank you very much for getting away from this obsessive sex conversation, which is beginning to sound a little lurid and a trifle boring, if I may say so, because it seems like I've written nothing else but that. I wish it was true, but it's not. So to answer your question, young India, and this is the 3rd generation reading me, has embraced my work in its totality, without judgment, without taking the moral high ground, without huffing and puffing about any of it. They have accepted it because their minds are maybe more open, more progressive. We've certainly come a long way since the 70s when I started my writing career. So it's been a complete pleasure, because when I go to universities and talk to these students, none of the young people there ask me these kind of inane questions. They ask extremely pertinent questions, which have a lot to do with the socio-economic and sexual changes in our own country. And those are something that we need to talk about. We need to start those conversations. There's far too much of a taboo, and we are afraid to talk to our young about matters sexual and matters that concern even younger generations, like my granddaughter's age, for example. Who is to tell them about even something like menstruation? When I was growing up, there was nobody who was willing to talk about it. Not my mother, not my older sisters, not my grandmother. It was something you found out through your peers. And I think that's unhealthy. So when you ask me that, I see that change. And to me, it's an extremely positive change, especially since so many of my books are actually read as course material in universities in India and across the world. And I find that wonderful, because it's also a learning experience for me. And talking to the young, I always come away energized. It's a whole lot more stimulating than talking to people my own age, or, people who just don't seem to get it and are stuck in some kind of a groove where writing has to be of a certain kind. And then that whole meaningless debate about high art and low art and literature and non-literature and fiction as an elevated form of literary fiction versus commercial fiction. At the end of it all, writing is writing. We are all writing the books we choose to write, which are our books. And the readers can decide for themselves, and they are very discerning indeed, especially the young, what they choose to read. So I feel great that even those early novels are now in whichever edition and are being read by young India and continue to be bestsellers. To me, that is the validation I need, and not some rubbish entry in Wikipedia, which I have utter contempt for.
Actually,
I just want to mention here that perhaps Shobhaa Day is the one who's had the maximum number of PhDs done upon her work for an Indian author. Shobhaa, is that right?
Well, I don't know about whether it's the maximum number, but certainly there are over 100 dissertations. A lot of them extremely insightful and academic, and seeing my books through the filter of women and the changes that new India, this India, and 20 years ago, how far have women come in terms of their own sense of acceptance of themselves as women in a country that's so dynamically changing constantly on so many levels, and yet stuck on so many other levels. So there are women who've had the most wonderful opportunities to shine, and then there's a vast majority who have no opportunity whatsoever to even basic education. So these are our contradictions. And unless a writer has that empathy or sensitivity, we are still going to be stuck on, bajaving the same old drum about women writers, men writers, women who write about boldly, women who write only about oppression, depression, suppression, repression. Well, these are my books, and I'm extremely proud of them, and I'm so happy to see the kind of reception the books get from a very young audience today.
Yeah, especially because the latest book under question, the liaison, the collection of stories which you have done,
Yeah.
I found like Rasam and Weed, the story,
Yes.
quite a reflection of what you were elaborating just now. Or
Yes.
you wrote it with this thought, or it was just it just came to you, and the moral or the theories came later.
I really write very organically. It's not something that's calculated. I don't know how other writers do it. For me, it is writing in the moment. It's not about foreseeing what the reception to the book or the stories may be. And the pandemic was cataclysmic on so many levels. We were all in such a funk of depression and anxiety, and we didn't know what tomorrow would bring. We didn't even know whether we'd wake up the next day. These stories emerged from that kind of sense of panic. So the Rasam and Weed story, I felt, was a pretty, for me, a way of understanding the contradictions of a young working couple and what happens when they have to be forced to go back to live with their parents, and their lifestyle choices are radically different from the very conservative background that they come from. And how do the parents accept that their kids may be doing weed? And how do the kids adjust to an environment which is so very different from the fiercely fought independence that they have achieved? And then it's back to square one. It's back to like being schooled and monitored and watched and judged. So yes, what young India went through, what middle India went through, what senior citizens like myself went through during the pandemic, I don't think we'll ever be the same human beings again. We've all changed. And I like to believe that we've all changed for the better. At least I can say that, speaking for myself and my family members. It was a time for a great deal of introspection, a lot of reflection, and a lot of cutting the flab. We just realized that we needed to curate our lives and be stricter with our time and who we choose to spend that with, because time is the biggest and only wealth left at the end of it all. When you're confronted by a virus, that's all you have, time, and it's very precious.
Yeah, hi. I think, hello, are you hearing me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. But as you said, you write organically, without thinking of any peripherals. But this is an era of MBA come writers who think of the marketing strategies and who think what will sell and who have a marketing plan. What do you say? What is your take on this way of writing? Because they are the best-selling people nowadays, generally.
Yes, of course. Hats off to them. They're just so much smarter than I am or ever could be. And it's all algorithm driven, and it's all about the numbers on Insta and how many followers, how many likes. And it's worked brilliantly for this generation of writers, and they're doing a good job. I'm not one of them. So it's entirely my loss. And I never intend joining that tribe, because I wouldn't even know what to do to get there. And neither do I have the energy levels to invest in fixing fixing marketing and sales strategies. I'd rather write, and that's my strength and that's my passion. And whatever time and energy I have, I'd prefer to invest it in a creative pursuit and not in chasing some kind of marketing goals and increasing my followers on any social media platform.
Yeah, I think in your story of that girl Aarti, who begins with theplas and goes on to, you know, go to the first landing and second landing. I think perhaps that organic way of progress you have reflected in that story.
Yes, I'm so glad that you brought up that particular story because definitely, yes, it's how I must have felt that particular morning. I must have read a news item or I may have seen something on television that triggered off that story because I wrote 26 stories in something like 4 weeks. And I was writing almost a story a day. And they were being simultaneously put out there, posted as ebooks. So the pace was manic. It was like a torrent. And I could not stop it. I didn't wish to stop it. And after the 26 stories were written, they became, the ebook was available. And then, of course, the physical book published by Simon & Schuster is out there and selling quite briskly, especially after Lilette Dubé has enacted 5 of those stories. So I'm just so happy to see the way Lockdown Liaisons has snowballed. And it was with the support of a very good editor and a superb team at Simon & Schuster. We were all working from our homes. It was all virtual and remote, and there was no eye contact, but we still managed. So a big thank you to the whole team.
Shobhaa, I've read Lockdown Liaisons, and a couple of stories really fascinated me, the early ones especially because I skipped a few in the middle. This one about Malibu Mansions, and you know, you've touched about the life of the chowkidar in this high-rise, very elitist apartment complex, and how the residents have, you know, whereas they've been taking exceptional work from him, he's been loyal, he's been dutiful, and yet how cynical perhaps this, you know, the heroine's husband is towards Shuklaji. And the name you've chosen is, you know, very resonant with somebody from the eastern part of India who's come over as an immigrant to Mumbai and who's been very loyal to all his, you know, employers, benefactors, but who's suddenly feeling neglected and lost. And the heroine, I mean, the protagonist is actually very sensitive and gentle, despite her husband being rather nasty and cynical towards this guy. I thought that was very humane, a very, very touching story. And there's another one about this person who, during this massive migration from the cities to the villages, who's concerned about his the lady he knows, who's helped him emotionally when his wife and family are away, and how he sort of, you know, the tension that is going on in his mind. Should he go to the village? Should he leave her, Suman? Or should he stay back? Now, these are very touching stories, and I'm surprised that somebody like you, who, you know, touches all the top celebrities, parties, who's around all the rich people, that you could be so sensitive and so humane in your writing. I mean, I was quite surprised. And so where did you get this sense of, you know, the urge to reflect upon day-to-day people and their difficulties and traumas and tribulations?
I am quite amused by the question, sir, because it somehow, it implies that if you belong to a certain segment of society, you are automatically insensitive, you lack empathy, you lack any kind of fellow feelings, and you're caught up in some sort of a bubble of your own creation. And the impression that I seem to drift from some great and glamorous event to the next event, and my entire life is celebrity driven. It really does amuse me in retrospect, because if that were indeed my life, and I wish it were that wonderful, I don't think I'd be working as hard as I do. I could be just an extremely pampered and spoiled and self-indulgent woman drifting from these great soirees in Mumbai and across the world or in Delhi. But that is not the reality. And also, it's not fair to think that every person from an affluent background, which they may be born into or been raised in, is necessarily impervious to life around them. And particularly for a writer, if I were to live in such a closed way myself, I wouldn't be writing at all. So it's easy to stereotype people. There are many ways of doing it. It can be because of the way the person's appearance is, or the segment of society they belong to, or maybe the many fantasies about such a person's life. And I guess there's something about my persona that attracts those kind of comments. I have no problem with it. But I have to tell you that a writer's job is to be sensitive towards every segment of their society and not selectively towards the society they themselves may be a part of. I'd be less of a human being, forget a writer, if I could shut my heart and my eyes and my feelings to the people we interact with, you and I and all of us on a daily basis, whether it's security staff, the people who work at home, our help, the watchmen. These are people who turn invisible for a lot of people. It has never been so for me. They are a part of my life as much as any other person who's a part of my life. And my respect for them is exactly what it is. And it's reflected in my stories and in my work.
Shobhaa, before we let you go, yes, first you, yes.
One question about which I'm really curious, because you have no hesitation about your age, is that in those times when you were a young girl, and I'm pretty sure you had the same personality of slightly rebellious and why not do this kind of nature. I don't know, I'm just trying to guess. What used to be the reaction of the senior ladies of your family and your mother? Because why I'm asking this question is that I want to hear something from you about feminism, and also I want to know about your understanding of feminism in today's world, where at least erudite people are talking about feminism as is equal to equality, is equal to human rights. So I would love to hear a little bit about this. Maybe if you want to put in your personal thing, fine. Otherwise, in general.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to, because unless you understand the personal, you can never understand the political. I believe that. And every action of ours, whether we label it that or not, is essentially a political act. Who we choose to marry, which college our parents send us to, whether we marry, the question about our children, what the values we impart to them, who we think are appropriate partners in our children's lives, which educational stream they should follow. These are all socio-political decisions. You can't see them in isolation. So I come from a bureaucratic family and a very conservative family at that, but I have to qualify, conservative does not mean a lack of progressive thinking. It just means a certain way of life which is not exactly ultra-modern. So I had every opportunity to be the person I am. I don't really know whether my family approved or disapproved, but all I can say, and thank them in retrospect, though my parents are not alive, is that they did not in any way impinge on any of those decisions or stop me from pursuing whatever it is that I wanted, with or without their approval. So they respected my sense of identity and my sense of independence. And without that kind of maybe not always expressed, but certainly implied support, I would have been a completely different person. With my mother, there was nothing but unconditional love. She was intuitive, intelligent, wonderful, and I would say the closest emotional bond I will ever experience with anyone in my life will remain the bond I shared with my mother. So she was not judgmental at all. She did not understand my world. She didn't have to. She understood me. And I think a lot of times our parents make that mistake of trying to pigeonhole their children into roles and definitions that you don't let the children decide that. You decide it on the basis of what society wants them, what wants of you and of them, and a certain conformist kind of thinking, which I'm just happy that my parents were free of that and progressive enough to let their 4 children pursue whichever academic field they chose to. And in my case, they just let me be. I was the youngest. And I don't think my choices were at all understood. But I didn't beat a drum about it and say, oh my God, I'm so misunderstood, I'm a victim. Not at all. I was very sure from a very young age as to who I am. And that strength, I think, definitely came from my mother, never making me feel apologetic about who I am. So when we talk about feminism, I do not believe in any kind of a militant advocacy of values. I do not believe in an ideology. I do not believe that there can be categories which says, if you conform to these rules, you can call yourself a feminist. If not, then you're not a feminist or you're a failed feminist. I know a lot of men who are far better feminists than the acclaimed and out there ladies who call themselves feminists, because the men are working sincerely and hard in their own lives and with the women in their lives and towards their attitude to society and women at large in a way that is very sensitive, extremely equal, and based on just one thing, the principle of justice. There's nothing else to it. We are all human beings. We all deserve a good, happy life, devoid of pressures, enforced either by society around us most of the time, or even legal pressures. So it's not that I believe in legislation and policy change. I just believe in being respected, and I don't think that too much. I respect men as much as I respect the second word. So if all that sense of equal respect of each other, it would just be a revolution. So if you choose to call me a feminist, I'm proud to be called that. If you choose to call me something else, it doesn't matter to me.
Shobhaa, fantastic. And before we wind up, we can't possibly let you off without mentioning some of your grand ability to kickstart conversation, discussion, controversy by making statements which capture headlines. And we've had you, calling a policeman with a very rotund belly as heavy bandobast. You called another film actress a lassie who lacks oomph for some specific reason, perhaps. You were bold enough to say, I eat beef, so come and kill me or capture me or do me in or whatever. Bure din aa gaye hain, such like. So while we marvel your ability to be bold, not to mince your words, where do you get this grand ability to stay on in the news? And does it come spontaneously, or do you have to think about it?
It's just the person I am, and I'm willing to take my chances and the responsibility that comes with putting myself out there, which millions of others hesitate to do because they're afraid of retribution. Well, that's something that does not in any way intimidate me. I will continue to speak my mind, and it is what I believe in, it's what I live by. So if it generates what, and I have to athlete, he was given free bariatric surgery in Mumbai and became a healthier and a much more active policeman, and publicly thanked me for that.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So, ladies and gentlemen, before I end, I want to read a few lines from a foreword to Shobhaa Day's fantastic book, Lockdown Liaisons. This is the book I have. It's extremely deceptive in its title. Most people would think that it deals with extramarital relationships during liaisons, like the kind which happened in Great Britain with their leader, or with various others who were locked up in the COVID lockdown, which has nothing to do with extramarital relationships. It's a very humane a lot of stories about very everyday people whom the kind of people you and I meet, about a very personal sort of rendition about their lives, their difficulties. It's a fantastic book. And I want to read this little paragraph. She captures the fragile zeitgeist of the pandemic in her own unique way through stories that don't provide an escape into a la-la land, but rather stories of love that will make you sometimes smile, sometimes frown, but at all times understand the subterranean world of shifting human emotions. The author and her stories don't shy away from the tremendous uncertainties of the world as we know, but rather help us to confront and understand it all just a little better. Fantastic. Shobhaa Day, a great hand to you. All of Bhopal is clapping for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. I look forward to coming and seeing all of you in person very soon.
Can you show the audience to her? It'll be very interesting if she can get a glimpse of the audience.
I would love to do that. Hello. Namaste. Namaste. How wonderful to see all of you. Thank you so much for listening to me so patiently. Thank you, Bhopal. And do invite me again. I'm sorry about not being there today with you. Thank you so much.
And before we sign off, we'd like to present to you a memento of our festival, which is a painting done by the tribal Padma Shri artist Bhuri Bai. We will ensure that it is couriered to you. You can tell us the address if you stay on wherever you want it. Thank you so much. This is the...